Can you hear me? Good, good, good. I was just talking to Harper back there. Of course, I'm Chris. I'm the guy before Harper. I'm the guy that's keeping you from getting to Harper. He's kind of like the Rolling Stones of this thing, and I'm like the kid with the recorder playing Baba Black Sheep. So this completely irrelevant picture of these horses in Mooley Points is to stop the evil sketching person from and it will be up for the duration of my talk. It has nothing to do with anything that I'm going to say, but it's very functional, like what Fran was talking about. No, you have to, it is relevant. You have to put it back. You have to put it back. See, now they don't know. Hello, everybody. I've forgotten what my topic is, so I'm just going to talk about what I've got over here, which may or may not be on the topic. I'm freaking out a bit because I don't have any acronyms in my talk, and there have been a lot of acronyms, ICEROI. I have CEO here in the first line, so that's good. That's good. So a few months ago, I saw a talk by a guy called René Rechtman, who's the CEO of a company called Go Viral, which is owned by AOL. And he said, we find ourselves in the most accelerated period of change in human existence, which I think is quite a statement. But it's definitely true, and you can go to conferences like this today and you feel things are changing at logarithmic pace. And I think that when we're all not around anymore, in 50 or 100 or 150 years' time, I think historians will look at this time, at this decade, and perhaps the one that follows this, as being the digital revolution, kind of like the Industrial Revolution. And I'm not sure many of us understand how important that is, because we're kind of inside it, experiencing it, and it's hard to assess the impact of it necessarily when you are inside. But I think when we stand back and we look at this thing, or when other people stand back, not in our lifetimes, and look at this thing, they'll say, wow, that was something that happened there. That really changed everything. So everything is changing. But when I look around, I also see that some things are not changing. And I think that that's especially the case with my industry, the advertising industry, the communications industry. And I think that's because some of the companies in my industry really, really don't want to change. And I don't think that there's any reason necessarily for them to change, because they are very comfortable, and they have been for a very, very long time. And at the moment, I think that a lot of the big ad agencies are kind of sitting around like the dinosaurs just before the asteroids hit, going, hey, it's cool. Not mine, of course. And I think that all this change that's happening in our society, and specifically in the communications industry, I found this, I didn't find this guy actually, Paul Krugman did, so I stole it from Paul Krugman, who's an economist. A 14th century Islamic philosopher called Ibn Khaldun. And I'm not in the habit of reading 14th century Islamic philosophers, but this is particularly useful. He was from North Africa, and in the desert where he lived, in the Sahara Desert where he lived, there were two different kinds of people, two different kinds of tribes. There were great, safe, civilized, walled cities where everyone was very safe and very comfortable and could get all the food that they wanted. And then on the outside were the fierce, nomadic tribesmen. And they were more organized, more resourceful, opportunistic, brave, probably more socially cohesive. And every decade or so, he observed, these walled cities became particularly complacent and fat and lazy and sitting around and being safe. And the nomadic tribesmen on the outside of those walls sensed this and overran them, destroying the cities, infiltrating the cities, and creating their own new dynasties. And I think that that's kind of what's happening in our industry at the moment, certainly in my industry. And I think it's happened in the tech industry, where you had big, safe, comfortable companies like Microsoft and Sony, and they were in the city, and Apple just crashed in on their space, and there was nothing that they could do about it. And I think it would be safe to say that that same thing may be happening to Apple pretty soon as well. But of course, in the ad industry, we have had our territory invaded by all comers. And our safe, walled city is being overrun by infidels and revolutionaries of all kinds. Some of you are sitting in the audience today. Many of you are sitting in the audience today. And we face huge challenges. So the media environment is self-combusted and fragmented. And consumers, even where they are whether you think they are going to be, so in other words, if a consumer is sitting at a couch and he's watching your stuff, a lot of the time they're not even watching my stuff. They're watching something else. They're watching another screen. And that's a cause of great frustration to me and my colleagues. So devices and new media have just changed things for us forever. And of course, the on-demand nature of content means that we can't force stuff onto people anymore. And I think that we're up onto 9 or 10 zettabytes of content out there. So just because I make something now and put it out there doesn't mean anyone's going to see it anymore. So things just don't work for me and for my colleagues the way they did a few years ago. And I think that the consumer has fundamentally changed, and we haven't caught up because we were lazy and we were kind of sitting around doing things in the old way. So I think that there has been a reaction, and obviously we know there has been a reaction, and we have changed to some extent, and there's obviously big digital agencies that are forcing us to change and integrate. And so what I'd like to talk a little bit about today is how we make people notice us again, how we become relevant again, how these challenges have forced us to do our stuff differently. So the horses, right? I have to make something up now about the horses. No. These sculptures, these kind of weird but I think really great sculptures, appeared on the Sea Point Promenade about a year and a half ago. And I make the habit of running past these sculptures every day. I don't look like I run a lot, but I run a short distance past the horses. And I normally stop and I look at them and I look out to sea. Sometimes I go and sit in amongst them because I need a rest. And I have a connection to them. And there's a reason why I have a connection to them. I'm intimately connected with them. They're part of my story. Because on the night of the 1st of July, 1966, in the sea right there beyond the horses, a ship called the Seafarer smashed into the rocks and broke in two. And my parents were on the ship. They were amongst the 13 passengers on the ship. And they were airlifted to safety by 17 helicopter squadron. And the other thing that happened was there were 20,000 cases of whiskey on the ship. And they smashed onto the rocks as well, unfortunately. A lot of people apparently waiting for the whiskey in Cape Town, but it never arrived. And in that time, White Horse whiskey used to have little white horses, little wooden white horses on every bottle. So for months and months afterwards, these little white horses washed up on the beaches, hence the angle of the horses. So the horses form this very direct and intimate connection with something that happened in the water beyond them, which is this shipwreck, because the ship is now completely disappeared. So this sculpture, Kevin Brand, has created, inadvertently, for me, an incredible reminder of my past. And it's a story that allows me to step right inside it. It's completely immersive for me. And it's an incredible link between these horses and the sea and what lies underneath the sea and what happened that night in 1966, 3 months before I was born. So what's important about this is I am in the story. And it's a wonderful example of what I would call immersive storytelling. Now, because Kevin Brand didn't only tell a story, he put me in the story. Now, he did that inadvertently, but I would argue that if you knew what was going on here, you would be equally as immersed. And why I use this example is because I think that what we need to do if we are to survive, certainly in my industry, if we're going to survive and thrive, is tell more stories like this, that puts someone in the story as opposed to putting it in front of someone and said, here's a story, you want to look at it? I think we have to build stories around people. I think we need to move from being storytellers to being story makers. Now, that might sound like semantic bullshit, but I think that there's a huge difference between the two. Because instead of merely dictating a narrative to me, we need to create stories that people are able to step into. And of course, we've got all the tools that are available to do that at the moment. So, as story makers, we obviously are not expecting our audience to be, by the way, I forgot. There's the ship. My timing's a bit out, so I apologize. I'll go back to the horses because I really don't want to give the rest of my presentation in front of a sinking ship. I don't like the symbolism, really. So, as story makers, we don't expect our audience to be passive consumers of what we're showing them. We want them to be things or do things or act in a certain way. We want them to be for something or against something. We want them to invent something. And our stories have to have what people are calling now social currency. And people are going to want to be part of them. And I think in order to be able to tell these kind of stories, a lot of agencies, whether they are digital agencies or advertising agencies or both, have to undergo a kind of creative destruction that comes from within. And I know this is happening in a lot of my friends who've gone to digital agencies and a lot of digital people who've gone to advertising agencies. They are both experiencing a kind of creative destruction in order to be able to tell these kind of stories. Ooh. I think that some of these companies will just carry on doing things the old way and they will disappear. And we've seen that happening already. Some of them will struggle to adapt and some of them will succeed. And I think that failure will be common and we'll have to deal with it. I think that the most fatal mistake that I've seen made, and I've made it many times, is presuming that I will get engagement just because I create something that it is possible to engage with. Oh, people can do that, and then they can do this, and then they can make their own film, and then they can do that. But no one does it. But I think that success, when it comes, will be spectacular. So, what does success look like? I think that when Harper comes on, he's going to tell you what success looks like. But I think that the genius of the Obama election campaign, apart from the digital component, was that they took a vote and they turned it into something much larger. That election became a grand, participative, historical event. It became a story. And if I had a vote, I was part of that story. And if I voted for Obama, I felt very, very much a part of that movement. And I think that it's important to recognize that these stories aren't necessarily linear, that the interventions don't have to have a start, a middle, and an ending. I've been part of a successful story. I think that the most successful one that I've done is probably the Carling Black Label Cup, where we took Kaiser Chiefs and Orlando Pirates, which is a fabulous narrative to have to work with. And we let the fans pick the teams for the Soweto Derby and make substitutions with their mobile phones. And so far we've had over 50 million personal interactions with that story because we built the story around the people. They interacted with the story. They made it happen. Now I think that this thing can take many forms. You know, I think that Red Bull Stratus Jump was quite a passive story-making exercise. But because it was live, I think it really did draw you into the experience. Dove Sketches is another one. I think that these things can inspire an act or an attitude. They can arrive via an app. I think that the distinguishing factor is the degree of immersive experience that we're giving people. And thank God we have the equipment to do it now. There's no excuse not to do this. That's why we're doing it in the first place, because people have fundamentally changed. So we need to use the tools at our disposal and tell these kind of stories. Otherwise, we're just having a one-way conversation like we have done for 60, 70 years. So I've got a few films to show you, case studies by way of example. You may have seen them, but hopefully in the context of my talk, they may make a little bit more sense. And they are I have 2 or 3 examples, but they are 2 or 3 of the examples of how I think that this works best. And I think that the important thing to understand is the magnetism of an involving story, as opposed to something that's just showed to you. There's the ship again. So this is something that was done for StarHub Mobile in the Philippines for a cell phone service provider.
Third eye. Viewfinder image. Double tap to take a picture. Uploading. Awaiting reply.
For the grayscale. Gets in his car and drives away far from all the things that we are. Puts on a smile and breathes it in and breathes it out. He says bye, bye, bye to all of noise.
I see a small stream in the foreground. Shape the next reply. To your left, I see red tulips blooming. There's a group of runners stretching and warming up. Uploading. Uploading. The oranges are from Australia and they look very fresh. I see a great buy. You should get them.
Don't be afraid, just eat up all
Uploading. Awaiting reply.
it will fade away. Don't let yourself fall down.
So I think that what I love about that and what's so great is that it takes a few million subscribers from a cell phone network and knits them together in a community that no commercial could ever do. It's kind of sneaky in a way. I mean, it's a very noble act, the micro-volunteering thing, but it's also a wonderful piece of immersive narrative. And we know, because of behavioral economics, something that Fran was talking about earlier, when someone does something to help someone else, they feel better about themselves. In fact, it's 80% of the reason why they do it in the first place. And it's really, really difficult to get people to like you when you are a mobile operator. So that's why I think this thing is such a piece of genius. Not only that it helped people, but it's such a good branding exercise. So the next piece, a lot of you may have seen, it's the Grand Prix from Cannes this year. What's interesting is at Cannes this year in film, they gave 2 Grand Prix. So they gave one to like a normal film, which was a one-way interaction, and then they gave another one to a digital film, which was this one, which is kind of disconcerting for some people, I suppose. Have a look at it.
This is the strange story of Alex, a man who wakes up every day in a different body. And for a while, that was okay. Alex kept a daily record of his odd life on his computer, which accompanied him everywhere he went. One day, though, Alex fell in love. And that is when everything changed. How could he have a relationship if he always looked different on the outside?
You never had a girlfriend?
We had girlfriends. A lot of girlfriends. Each one Only for a night.
The Beauty Inside, inspired by Intel Inside, featuring the Toshiba Ultrabook, starring Topher Grace, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and the audience. The movie was aired in 6 weekly episodes, and because Alex looked different every day, anyone in the audience could play him and be featured in the film. Each episode contained a few webcam diaries in which real fans actually wrote and acted out some of Alex's most intimate moments in the movie.
I called her 3 times today. I hung up every time.
And in the end, the audience helped give Alex hundreds of faces. This love story by 2 technology companies reached 70 million views. It got strangers discussing their own sense of identity, all while celebrating the fact that it's what's inside that counts.
She was right. I would see her again. But she would never see me.
So, I've worked on Intel. I know how hard it is to do a piece of emotional work about Intel Inside. It's virtually impossible. I mean, Intel Inside featuring the Toshiba Ultrabook. But it's fantastic, and it's very emotional. So I think that where we stand now, we can make one of 2 choices. We can retreat and be confused and flummoxed and by this complexity of platforms we have to deliver all our messages. And we can stay in our safe, walled city, and we can continue to be overrun and overwhelmed. Or we have the chance, the incredible chance, to immerse people in our brands like never before. And we have the chance to become story makers. And personally, I could not imagine a better way to make a living. Thanks very much.